Cyberpunk 2077 has gotten a lot of praise for a lot of things recently, but they've also taken some flack for being insensitive to the trans community. Welcome back to Higher Level Gaming. I'm Katie.
And I'm Rob.
And today we're talking Cyberpunk 2077 and how some people are mad at the game already. That was really fast.
A lot of critics are giving the game some flack, and this all started with a Rock Paper Shotgun article, which was pretty critical of not only the gameplay, but also the political correctness of the game. And then Anita Sarkeesian, who talked about how, or in a tweet, she mentioned how, they haven't always had the best representation of women. So we just kind of want to talk about, our opinion about these two things. Yeah. Mostly these two articles which kicked off this discussion and what we think about it, and try to give like a really insightful approach to it, because we tend to be pretty liberal and agree with people like Anita Sarkeesian in principle. I will say though, she does come off pretty condescending in this scenario. She's like, oh, you guys should hire me, and then she like just says to any developer like, oh, just hire me, Anita Sarkeesian, because I'm the best. She's kind of
rude about it. Like, she's kind of like, oh, you should hire me if you don't want to be made fun of. It's kind of weird. I don't know. She's pretty woke in a good way, I would say. She has done some things that were crazy, and I don't support her violent outbursts, especially like with Boogie 2988 and all that drama. Her personality seems to be pretty volatile, and I think that's just an issue that she needs to work out. But in principle, I really agree with most of the things that she believes. She also, her question is valid. Will this game be able to handle these LGBTQ issues in a, sensitive way that non-cis people can walk away from it feeling like, that was a good way to be represented and they're not offended? Because you don't want to offend these people if you are trying to include them, which Cyberpunk 2077 devs now have confirmed that you can be trans in the game and have sex change operations, I suppose, with the cybernetics in the game. So that's something that will definitely become talked about in the future, and that's going to be a big aspect of how people judge this game. Yeah, I don't think there's any game out that has that kind of option in it. So that's definitely going to be pretty interesting when it comes out, to see how it works and how people receive it.
So while you could argue that CD Projekt Red has struggled with objectification in the past, and surely The Witcher, the original game, wasn't as woke, as you might say, as The Witcher 3 with its more complex character portrayals, it was harder for me to see the accusations of racism. Sure, there weren't an abundance of black or brown people in Witcher 3, but that game wasn't actually racist at all, not to my knowledge anyway. The fact that there isn't a precedent makes it harder to argue still, because the creator of Cyberpunk 2020, who is working quite a bit on this game, has not only co-signed the depiction of blacks in the game, he most likely wrote a good amount of it and gave his notes on the finished product. This is a game being created hand in hand with the creator of the source material, the tabletop role-playing game Cyberpunk 2020. Mike Pondsmith has clearly signed off on these depictions, and being a black man himself, I doubt he's gonna let them put anything overtly racist in the game.
There is, however, the possibility that Mike Pondsmith, albeit a black man, isn't the wokest person in the world. His ideas about individuality and the problems that face niche groups in the real world are expressed pretty clearly in this game manual.
This is an actual excerpt from one of these Cyberpunk 2020 game manuals, and it talks about diversity and unity. And it goes as follows. It is now accepted among historical scholars that in the decades before the collapse, America suffered from the sickness of racism and, quotation marks, cultural identity. Everyone wanted to be seen as special. Every group had to be equal or preferably better than its neighbors, and fought to protect its special, again quotation marks, rights. If anyone had something that someone else wanted, they were painted as racist, sexist, elitist, or worse. This divisive me-first attitude eventually tore the fabric of American culture apart and caused it to self-destruct in a fireball of competing ideologies, none of which truly recognize each other's validity. Diversity led inexorably to anarchy. So, I don't know, that just gives me like this strange Hitler vibe. Don't get me wrong. But
yeah, I don't know if that's the point, but it is kind of a little weird. Like,
I honestly have to say
to
this comes off as a black dude who like has gotten so kind of removed from the issues of his own people that he thinks it's like petty to complain about the conditions that black people have to face in this country, or any marginalized group. I'm assuming that would include trans people, that would include any other minority, Latinos such as myself, anything that, people want more support and recognition from society for. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think that diversity is a good thing, and there's a lot of benefits to having diversity in competing ideologies. Of course, we should be unified as a society, and it's a problem that our ideologies are clashing so drastically in our world today, but I think that it's important for progress that we always are questioning what we think is the right way to do things, and I think that maybe some things are meant to be left in the past, and maybe conservatism is one of those things. I'm just going to be straight up. We eventually have to eat the rich people because they are so toxic to the rest of society.
I'm down to become a cannibal.
I'm down to be a cannibal. Let's cyberpunk it up, guys, okay? I think that this clearly comes off as a statement that's bashing diversity and bashing any kind of person that's different than the norm.
Yeah, it's kind of like, shaming the people that are like protesting for rights.
This is from the 1988 rulebook of the game, and they're saying that it's prophetic. In this thread, people are like, wow, diversity is destroying everything. People aren't fighting for priority, they're fighting for equality. That's exactly what this whole argument misses. The whole argument misses the fact that people aren't fighting for priority. We don't want to be treated better than everyone else. We just want to be treated fairly.
Yeah.
Minorities particularly, and, LGBTQ people.
Yeah, like, is it so wrong to be treated just like everyone else?
And, of course, you get places like Red State, which are super hardcore conservative Republican places agreeing with that.
Prophetic.
Now, we will note that Mike Pondsmith was the co-author of Cyberpunk, so these things might not represent his beliefs entirely. It could have been some of the co-authors of this edition of Cyberpunk, just to be clear. So we actually have some interviews. We actually have an interview from Eurogamer with Mike Pondsmith that just came out, and he talks about the ad and how it's created a bit of a stink online. There are a lot of flavors, you can mix it up, but it clearly looks like a woman who has an enormous penis, and he says, I don't see it. I don't understand how he can't see that giant cock. So then he said, I think some people are viewing it as transphobic. I was wondering if chromatic core was anything you'd had any input on. And he actually says that no, he had no input on it, and he hadn't run across anybody who's got a problem with transphobia, and it isn't something that happens at his studio where he writes all his games, I guess, tabletop games. We have trans staffers, actually, he says, and I have an insanely large number of friends. So for me, it's kind of like, what was the issue? I don't know. The problem with this is often people come to things with their own interpretations, and they bring their hang-ups, basically, he's saying, with them. Examine anything in their world. This could be bad art, could be a message, depends on how you interpret it. It's not specifically reported, so consequently the problem with these sorts of situations is that if you approach things in a particular way, you may see things that nobody sees, you may see things that somebody should see. One of the reasons we have a multi-level culture is because we can see it differently. I have no idea what he's saying there. Not necessarily to say that's wrong or right. When I look at it, I don't see it. The problem, I guess. It's a good drawing of someone who's got a Coke, and my immediate thought was, it's a bad ad, but as far as I know, it's supposed to be a bad ad. Not supposed to be a good ad. It's like people arguing about representation of various groups, he says. I kind of look at it as, well, when I represent people in Cyberpunk, they're from every walk of life and every single place. I'm not exactly taking a time clock to see who's there. I'm going to go, does this reflect the world that I see or that I think probably should be out there? And particularly the world in Street, that should be a very complex, very open world, because the Street doesn't have room to pick sides and differentiate. At a certain point, he says, there will be no right answer if somebody comes at it with their interpretation. There will be mine and theirs, and there are going to be people who say you need to be doing this about it, and I'm going to say I'm doing what I do about it.
So he's saying, like, I'm gonna do me.
This sheds light on the issue in a lot of good ways. Like, we know that, you know, Mike Pondsmith, he doesn't have anything against trans people, it doesn't seem. And it doesn't seem that he has anything personally against diversity. So, though that was in the rulebook for Cyberpunk, maybe his views have kind of shifted from then on till now. He seems to nowadays care more about, like, I just want to make sure people are realistic. I just want to make sure my characters... Right.
It seems like he actually does care about representing people, like when he mentioned like how he imagines people in his game from all walks of life and not having to pick sides. So with that statement, it just seems like he didn't intend to offend anyone or make any kind of statement. At the very least,
he doesn't even necessarily know that this is something that was happening, so you can't really blame him for it. It's not like he signed off on this, and that also shows us that he's not going to be signing off on everything that happens in this game, so you can't necessarily hold him accountable. He wasn't even aware of this ad, which is kind of interesting, and he probably tries not to pay attention to all the crazy hubbub that's going on about the game. The fact that he does have trans friends and that, you know, he has people who work at his company who are trans tells me that he's not someone who's discriminating against anyone, and that's what really matters at the end of the day. Does this person engage in discrimination, or does this person do anything to harm these marginalized people? And I don't think Mike Pondsmith is doing that. I mean, again, he's a black dude, so I'm sure he experiences racism in his life at some point. He experienced it at some point where it affects him and he understands what it's like.
And he kind of interpreted it as the same way that I did, which was that it was a bad ad and that it was meant to be a bad ad. Not like to be offensive, but like it's meant to highlight like how in our modern day society people are sexualized and used by these companies as like objects to sell their products. So that's kind of what I took it as, and I think overall that was the point.
So we're going to go ahead and make a judgment call here and say that Mike Pondsmith is not actually transphobic or racist, thank God. We're also going to say that The Witcher 3 wasn't actually sexist, maybe it was sexual, but it showed pretty complex narratives of men and women, and the women were definitely their own characters and made their own decisions and weren't objectified or made to not have a voice or their own drives. It's one of the games with the best storytelling and some of the best character development of any RPG. Looking at what we know about Cyberpunk 2020, the tabletop game, we actually know that some trans body mods would negatively affect your character.
Some of the Cyberpunk rulebooks have made transgender mods make you lose your humanity. And I'll admit, like, even though all of the cyberware mods make you lose humanity, it does seem a little wrong that, you know, trans mods make you lose humanity. Because if the point is being able to choose a transgender person in the game, you shouldn't necessarily be punished for it.
It's not clear if that's going to be a mechanic in the game Cyberpunk 2077. This is just something that was a mechanic in the RPG tabletop game.
Yeah, so I really hope that they actually leave that out.
With low enough humanity, people enter cyberpsychosis, a state similar to Frenzy in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. This is clearly potentially sending the wrong message, and if that mechanic makes it to being a feature of the game, I'm sure it will offend people.
Yeah, because in Vampire the Masquerade, the only way you lose humanity is if you kill people.
Now we have to talk about the big ol' Pinor ad, because there was a trans ad in the game, of course, that started all this beef, depicting a trans person with a penis who looks very feminine on the cover of an ad drinking a drink called Chromanticure, which has the tagline, "Mix it up." Clearly, this is kind of a play on words and the fact that this is a transgender person. It also sends the message that in this futuristic world, trans people are kind of more normalized. They're also being exploited by corporations for beauty, just like anyone else in society may be. They're being exploited just like anyone else would be based upon beauty standards, especially when they have these different ways to modify their bodies. That's what the artist said anyway about the ad, but a lot of people took offense, especially trans people, and on Twitter, people are like boycotting the game and saying that you shouldn't buy it and that it's going to suck. And a lot of the criticism in the Rock Paper Shotgun article people are arguing is because they didn't like the depiction of how you were killing people who were black in the game, and because of that trans ad. So as for the killing of the people who are black in the game, Katie, you know a lot about this. Why don't you tell us some more?
As far as the people in the game, I know that they have said that the gangs aren't primarily all black people, that they are mixed, but honestly, I think it makes sense.
They are mixed, but these two gangs that were showcased primarily consist of Haitians who are black.
Yeah. I think it is a little uncomfortable, but I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I do think it is a little weird to see, like, you know, black people represented in a negative light like that, like in gangs. But I don't think it's necessarily wrong.
Especially when Mike Pondsmith, the creator of the game, is working closely alongside them, and he definitely said that this was part of his vision for the animals and for the Voodoo Boys, and he signed off on their usage in Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah, when it comes to things like this, I always go back to, well, are the people that are working on this game being included? Like, if black people are being represented in this game, are there people on the team that I can count on to represent black people in another, like, better light?
Since the creator is black, I'm sure he's not going to let them represent black people in a racist way either. I think that what it was that this the person who wrote this article was kind of sensitive to the violence, and maybe that's not something that they were really interested in with this game, so they found it distasteful, and the fact that they were black gangs made them extremely uncomfortable and like they were doing something wrong because of their sensibilities. But that's not what Mike Pondsmith was sending the message of, that we need to kill all these black people. At one point, though, they do something that's extremely wrong. The main character, V, does mock another character who's black for talking in Ebonics at one point, though, which is, if you don't know, how black people just speak in America, and that's actually widely accepted as something that's not because they're stupid, but because it's a cultural difference between black and white people in America. They speak differently. So the fact that V is making fun of how a black person speaks is definitely racist.
Yeah, that definitely makes me uncomfortable. Like, for some reason, I'm far more comfortable than seeing black people depicted in gangs because, you know, poverty is a factor when it comes to gang life. But as far as the mocking of, you know, the Ebonics, like the way she talks, it's just completely unnecessary in my opinion and doesn't really have any comic value. So it just
comes off as immature and brash and kind of like stupid humor that I would expect in a game that's aimed at, you know, a lot younger people.
Right, especially when Cyberpunk is apparently doing their best to include everyone, you know. They should just kind of avoid the corniness.
They're not necessarily making it a goal to include everyone either. That's definitely not something they're doing at all. They just want to make a good game. That's their priority. They don't really care about inclusivity. And in fact, I think they definitely have a distaste for politics, you know, identity politics in general, which is fine. I don't really care if you want to make that your hill to die on or not. That's not what makes a good game. I just care that the game is good and that it's not, you know, a piece of propaganda that's depicting people in a negative way, or making people feel like they're dirty or wrong or less than because of factors outside of their control. Overall, I think that Cyberpunk 2077 is definitely going to have some more bumps and, you know, hiccups along the road to release, and there's going to be more details released that I think might rub people the wrong way, but I honestly think that they're trying to do a pretty good job with this, and I'm sure that the game will end up doing its best to give us rich characters with stories that are not offensive, but I don't know if they'll actually be able to pull that off. I know that's going to be their goal.
Yeah, I hope they don't prove Anita Sarkeesian right.
Yeah, I hope they do a pretty good job with their representation, but considering how well the writing was done in The Witcher 3, I'm not worried. This has been Higher Level Gaming. I hope you liked our thoughts on the issue. Maybe it made you think a little harder about it. Maybe you think something completely different than us. Maybe you think it's really offensive. Maybe you think people need to be less sensitive. And maybe you think diversity is destroying the world. Whatever you think, go ahead and let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to have a nice day, and above all else, go play some video games.